Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I'm your host, Randi-lee. On the show, we interview other writers and we talk about mental health from their personal journeys. If you have not already hit that like and subscribe button, go ahead, do that now so that you never miss an episode. Hi, everybody. Look, I did blue lipstick today because I keep forgetting I have other fun colors and just keep using red. So much more fun when we make it colorful. Anyways, today with us, we have Mark Morton, and more importantly, Jasper the dog.
He is.
There's the baby. Oh, what kind of puppy is it? Oh, he's so beautiful.
He's we're not exactly sure, but he's probably Shepherd Collie mix.
So beautiful. I love puppies. Yeah. I have 3 puppies.
Oh, we have 4 in total.
Nice. I have 5 kitties.
Oh.
We only had 4 for the longest time. We were not intending to get another one, but I could not let Binks go to the Humane Society. So she had to come live with us.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I love animals. I could talk about animals all day long. I really could. Maybe I should just have a show about them.
Yeah. They're very therapeutic.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. They're just the best. My our one dog, who is a black lab, whenever my grandson sleeps over, because he's always over Tuesday nights, my grandson loves sleeping with the fan on. Well, Freddie, the black lab, also loves to sleep in front of a fan. So he will wait until my grandson falls asleep, and then he'll sneak his way in to be the one in front of the fan.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you are such a little jerk.
Yep.
It's funny. Anyway, tell us a little bit more about who Mark is, other than the fact that you love puppies.
Sure. Well, dogs are a big part of my life and our family's life, but I'm in Canada. I always lived in Canada. Well, I lived in France for a while. But yeah, I grew up in Saskatchewan, which is a province kind of above North Dakota.
I've never been. So I'm in Ontario.
Yeah.
Never been out west yet. Well, West Canada. I got married in the States out west in Vegas. But I've yet to go west, and I really think I want to. My uncle lives in BC. So I keep telling him, I'm just going to come and hang out at your house.
Well, I live in Ontario now, so we're in the same province.
Oh, whereabouts are you here?
In Kitchener, and I work at University of Waterloo. Yeah,
I'm close to the falls, so you're not far. I was just my cousin went to the University of Waterloo actually, and we were just in Kitchener not too long ago for the Vampire Circus.
Oh yeah,
the performing arts. Yeah, so good.
Yep, absolutely.
I know exactly where you're at.
So I grew up in Saskatchewan, and that's shaped me very, very much. Growing up on the plains, or the prairie, as we call it in Canada, it still kind of defines who I am. And I've lived in Ontario for 20 years now, and did my PhD as well. So that was another 7 years. So lived almost half my life in Ontario, but it's never felt like home really. So I try to hang on to the idea of home in other ways. I surround myself with artifacts and photographs and things like that, as you can see behind me. I did my PhD at the University of Toronto in English literature. Then I taught for a while in France, and then I worked for 12 years at the University of Winnipeg in Manitoba. And then I got a job at the University of Waterloo. And shortly after my wife and I arrived here, we decided that we were going to adopt kids. Actually, we decided that back when we were in Winnipeg, and we began that process. But then I got the job here, so we had to put that on hold. Began it again once we got here. Adopted 2 older children. They were 9 and 10 when we adopted those 2, and then after a few more years,
were they siblings? Is that why you adopted them both? Okay.
Yeah, they were a sibling group. That's right. And then a few years later, we adopted another sibling group. And in fact, they're twins, fraternal twins. So that gave us 4 kids, and that's what my wife and I spent. We both continued to work. My wife part-time for the most part, although sometimes full-time. I continued to work full-time, but we were also raising these 4 kids. And as I'm sure everyone knows, when kids are when kids are adopted at older ages, in other words, when they're apprehended by the state and become crown wards at older ages, that's because of things that have gone wrong in their birth families. And so the kids have suffered a lot of trauma, usually. That was the case with all of our kids. And so it meant that raising them had, I think, additional challenges to raise
Yeah.
other kids, helping them deal with their trauma and just other things that had gotten behind in school, things like that. So
Yeah.
that was the hardest thing that my wife and I had ever done. So yeah, we focused on that for 15 or 17 years until they got to be more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
3 of them now live outside of our house. One is still going to college, so lives here.
Nice.
And it was only at that point, when they got older, that my wife and I were each able to get back into our writing careers. And that's what I recently did by writing and publishing a young adult novel.
Nice. So what's the one in school taking?
She's taking, it's called social service work. So it's kind of like
Okay.
social
Yep.
work, but it's a college diploma program.
Yes.
And then she'll decide later if she wants to do a Bachelor of Social Work.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. And so, I'm being super nosy now, because I have never had the opportunity to ask somebody who's adopted 2 different sets
Yep.
of siblings.
Yep.
How did they get along? Because I mean, siblings in general tend to have
Yeah.
arguments, but how
Oh,
was
for
that
sure.
merging the different families together?
It's been really interesting seeing the different permutations that formed. Like, I would say that as a unit of 4, they all developed a pretty good bond. They would sometimes talk about the parents, so
The parents.
yeah, the parents. But it's interesting, it's sort of across the sibling groups between Brandon, who's the eldest, and one of the twins, Roxana, that I would say the strongest bond has developed. Brandon has been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and Roxana has just she adores him. She helps to support him. She is just so amazing with him that
Oh,
it
that's
feels
awesome.
really good, as I get older, and my wife is younger than me, but as she also gets older, it's great to know that siblings will continue to help Brandon after we're gone.
That's so good. Oh, I'm so glad that everybody gets along. That's
Yeah,
amazing. And
yeah.
like I said, siblings in general tend to have
Oh,
arguments
yeah.
and fights. So it's nice when you can have those happy stories. I
Yeah,
mean, our 2, um, they got along when they were little, and then they didn't get along for a few
sure.
years, and now they get along again. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. You kinda have to lose what you have before you realize that you need it back.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your mental illness journey and
Yeah.
lots of things that go along with that, because you have a pretty interesting one that after 200 plus episodes we have yet to talk about, which is
Oh, yeah, 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 that was, I think, the first thing that I mentioned when
yeah,
we were emailing. I have something called prosopagnosia, which is not strictly speaking a mental illness, like, it's not in the DSM, but basically
yeah.
what it is, it's face blindness, which means that I have great difficulty recognizing people, and great difficulty recalling faces in my head. Um, I often tell people that I I knew my wife, well, she when we were dating, I knew her for many months before I could recall what she looked like in my head.
Wow.
And even
Yeah.
now, it varies, but it's sometimes, like right now, I'm trying to recall the face of my um, boss at work, and I've known him for close to 20 years now, and I can't think of what he looks like. Um, but somebody else, I can think of what they look like. So it's kind of all over the place. It's harmless, except that it creates some embarrassing situations sometimes, where I walk by people that know me well. And it creates challenges when I'm watching a movie because, if somebody
Yes.
goes off screen and comes back with a different clothes on, I often won't recognize them. Although as soon as they speak, like, I've got a really, really good ear for voices, and that's often
Okay.
helps me to recognize people. I should say too, if somebody is very distinctive looking, has a big red beard or something like that.
Yes.
But yeah. So I've got that prosopagnosia.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it because I was like looking at the word. I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna mess this up. When were you diagnosed with that?
Well, I didn't really begin to notice it until I started to go to university, and there was a film, there was a cinema on campus, and so I started to go to a lot of movies. And sitting there with friends, I would realize that they were not having the same problems identifying people as I did.
Okay.
And so that's sort of when I put two and two together. But it wasn't until even later than that that I realized there was such a thing. And I think that was when what's his name, Oliver Sacks, the psychiatrist,
Mhm.
the author of books like The Man Who Mistook His Wife for His Hat, things like that. He also he's passed away now. He also had prosopagnosia. So I think, and he wrote about it
Okay.
in an essay for the New Yorker. And so that's where I learned the name of it, and I realized, oh, okay, that's what I have. Um,
Wow.
yeah. Um, wasn't a,
Isn't oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just isn't it interesting that we don't realize that we have something, that
Mhm.
something is different because you just live with it your whole life, and it takes like an aha moment of, oh, you don't have the same issue that I
Yeah.
have, or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
because I had a lot of those moments before I got diagnosed with autism where I'm like, wait, but you don't constantly move your toes around in your shoes like 24/7. Like just
Right.
just
Right.
little things that you're like, everybody deals with,
Yeah.
everybody does this. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. That's
huh,
so true. Yeah, I know several people who with different things have discovered that. Like, oh, I thought everybody was like that.
right.
Like for example, I was reading recently that the vast majority of people, including myself, and I assume you, have a little voice in our head. That when
Yeah.
we're thinking, we can hear a voice, but apparently not everybody does. Um, I don't know how that would what that would be like. I just can't imagine it would be
Right?
like.
I can't
Yeah.
I know. And so my voice never shuts up.
Yeah.
My husband has a voice because we had this conversation, but he's like, yeah, it's not it's pretty quiet. He's
Yeah.
like, there's silence a lot of the time. I'm like,
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't understand what that would be like. Just
Yeah.
silence in your brain. I don't get it.
Yeah, 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 I would like that sometimes, I think.
Right? And he's like, what do you mean your brain's not quiet? I'm like,
Mhm.
it never shuts up. Like it's always on.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so, I guess it was, while we were raising the kids, and as I was saying, it was the most challenging it was the most meaningful, the best thing we ever did with our lives as well, but
Yeah.
the most challenging, the most difficult, and I think it was in the midst of that I began to experience some mental health issues for the first time, because it was exhausting. And often it was very disheartening. You're not sure how things are going to turn out.
Yeah.
And I just got more and more worn down. And I think there's something called, oh, what is it called? There's a certain kind of hormone. I forget. It's called the stress hormone, but it can
Oh,
sometimes
yeah,
be depleted.
cortisol?
Cortisol, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was tested for that. Um, anyways, I recall, because it happened slowly, I don't think I actually realized it until one day,
Mhm.
my wife and we drove our car to a mechanic to get it fixed, and while we were waiting, we walked over to a coffee house, and I remember sitting there and just starting to cry, and just wasn't
Oh,
sure why. Well, I mean, I
yeah.
sort of knew why, but I was surprised that that started to happen, and
Yeah,
in retrospect, I'm kinda jumping ahead now. In
that's
retrospect,
okay.
I look back at myself then, at that person then, and I feel badly for myself because, I wasn't getting any treatment yet. I wasn't getting any medication yet, and, was having to deal with a lot, without any medication or
Yeah.
therapy. Once I started taking, a couple of medications, things got much, much better, um, and stayed quite good for a long time until, um fairly recently. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this. Um, Back in August, my medications ran out. I knew they were running out, but I didn't
Yeah.
act on it, didn't get a new prescription. So I thought, well, my doctor's been asking me if I would like to try to stop taking them.
Yeah.
So I thought, why not?
How many years had you been on them at that point?
Oh, probably 9 or 10, I think. Um, and so I didn't do it under my doctor's supervision, and I didn't do it by tapering off.
I am
And
laughing because I did the same thing.
well,
And it's
so common.
awful.
It's
It's
so
so
common.
bad.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, people should never do it.
No.
Without a
No.
doctor's
No.
you need a doctor's supervision. You need to do it slowly.
Yeah.
And so, I had these brain flashes for a long time. Well, not a long time, for a couple of weeks, and then they went away, and I thought, "Oh, okay, I'm through this." And then sort of over the course of a couple days, I just began to feel strange until it was my wife's birthday, actually, and we went out to a restaurant. And again, I just started uh, crying in a restaurant on her birthday. But it was different than the time before
Yeah.
because it felt like there was something in my brain that was just depleted.
Mhm.
It felt sort of, what's that word? The qualia or the qualia, of the experience was just so different. There was no way that I could lift myself out of it,
Mhm.
It felt like no matter what happened, something awful or astonishing could happen outside the restaurant, and I would feel just the same, because it felt like I was just missing something
Yeah.
chemically. And so, yeah, sure enough, after a couple more days, got in to see my doctor, and she got me back onto not citalopram this time, but escitalopram, which I guess they call the left-handed version of citalopram. Um,
Okay.
Apparently, it has fewer side effects,
That's
and
always good.
yeah, yeah, and very quickly, like faster than I was supposed to start to feel better. I started to feel better, because
Good.
it felt like again, it felt like I had just been depleted, and finally there was something going back into my brain,
Yep.
um, that I needed. And yeah, I feel pretty good now. Um, maybe I'll say something else here, and I've got a PhD in English. I don't know anything about medicine, so um, take everything I say with a bucket of salt. But back when I was doing my PhD, so this would be in my um, early mid 20s,
Okay.
um, I experienced what I wouldn't call depression, but I've always thought of as despair. And the distinction I make is that to me, it feels like despair is something that the mind generates, whereas depression, I think, to me, is something that the brain generates. And what I mean is that
Okay.
I began to focus and obsess on death, and the idea
Oh.
of nothingness. And I thought, what does it mean? One day I'm gonna be nothing, except I won't be nothing because there won't be an I. And
Okay.
my mind would spin, these wheels for a number of years. This went on, and it felt like I was in despair. Um, and it felt like, well, this is how everybody should feel. Doesn't everybody experience this kind of
Right? That's how I was
yeah,
back as a teen, and I was like, "Well, everybody hates
yeah,
themselves."
yeah. And it wasn't helped by the fact that my PhD in English was on 16th century literature, and I was focusing in particular on a work called The Fairy Queen. And
Oh, okay.
actually, my dissertation's title was Despair and Metamorphosis.
Oh my goodness.
And they sort of fed each other. Like, no doubt, I decided to
Yeah.
focus on the despair part because of what I was feeling. But then,
Right, yeah.
you're reading these 16th century books about despair and melancholy and stuff like that, and that probably contributed to it as well.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I kept thinking, "Oh, if I think about this long enough, I'll solve this. I'll be able to figure out, what is nothingness?
Mhm.
What is meaning? What does it mean to be?" Et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I never did. Finally, I just said, "Screw this. I'm gonna stop thinking about this, even if it means kinda compartmentalizing and putting it, into a
Yeah.
shoebox and up on a shelf in the back of my mind." And that's what I was able to do pretty successfully for a long time. Um, anyway, so I just wanted to make that distinction in my own experience between
Of
what I
course.
believe is despair
Of
and
course.
depression, clinical depression. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's just, and there are times when you could be in a depression and come out of it and not need medication and
Yeah.
not need, right? Like it's so different. It's a vast array of variances for
Yeah.
every individual,
Yeah.
right? Some people don't need medication.
Mhm.
Some people should not have went off of it.
Yep. Yep.
I'm
Yeah.
speaking for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And
Yeah.
I feel so badly, especially in light of my, the recent crisis that I had. I feel so badly for how many thousands of years or tens of thousands of years of humans who experience that without medication,
Right.
and
Yeah.
their depression would have been just as awful as ours nowadays. And a lot of people, back then would have said, "Oh, it's just smarten up, work harder, get yourself out of this, lift yourself up by your
Yeah.
bootstraps."
What do you have to be sad about?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sad. I think the same thing, every time I go to the dentist, I think about, "Oh, those poor people 100 years ago who didn't have anesthetic," you know?
Right. Yeah. Things have definitely changed over the
Yeah,
years.
yeah, yeah,
Um, Actually, my friend and I, we do a show about the history of mental illness. We haven't
mm,
quite delved into the history of depression yet, but we
yeah,
have done some interesting ones. Um, I did oh my gosh, my brain is blanking. Bipolar,
yeah,
and we did lobotomies,
mm,
insulin shock therapy,
yeah,
um, asylums, like some very
yeah.
interesting ones. So
The
anybody who's
Panning
listening,
was an old one.
yep,
Yep, yep,
yeah, yeah.
awful.
So anybody who hasn't went back, watch the Bedlam episodes. They're all, it's everything's on this channel. So just go
Yeah,
back and watch them.
yeah,
Um, I think I'm gonna do schizophrenia
mhm,
research next to do the history of that one, because what we've learned is schizophrenia was like the mental illness that they had a name for, and everything else was compared to it.
yeah, yeah,
So it's kind
yeah,
of interesting.
yeah,
So what are some of the coping strategies that you've learned? So obviously we talked about medication a little bit. Well,
mhm.
what are some of the coping strategies that you've learned over the years?
Well, our dogs, one thing I
Yay.
didn't mention is that back, after I guess I was like my late 20s, I had a couple of panic attacks, and they just came out of the
Oh,
blue. I don't know where they
yeah.
came from. And what was most helpful was I had one dog at that point.
Mm.
Farley was his name, and I
Oh,
remember calling him over and just looking in his eyes, and that was so helpful. So I've found having dogs, creatures in the best sense, uh,
yes.
around us, to be really helpful, not just in acute moments like that, but just generally having them in the house,
Yes. Especially
seeing them.
puppies, because they force you to go outside with them.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, having to walk a dog, I've read, I forget where this was, but I've read that people with dogs on average live longer, and maybe it's partly because of the emotional support, but maybe it's also, you have to,
Yeah.
engage with them physically,
Yeah.
take them for walks or
Hmm.
yep, yep.
Mhm.
So dogs have been really, really helpful. Um, different kinds of art as well. Like, it might seem strange given that I have prosopagnosia, but I love visual arts, like, I love looking at paintings. I love taking photographs.
So does the I'm gonna say it wrong.
Prosopagnosia.
prosopagnosia.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
we go.
Yeah.
Does that transfer over to art? Like, do you have the same issue trying to recall art as faces?
No, I can recall hundreds of, artworks that I've looked at, almost with an ability to kind of zoom in on different parts of them.
Oh, okay.
Um, so I don't know if it's because they are two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. I have no idea.
Oh, maybe.
Um, Same thing with photographs. When I take a photograph, I think I've got a pretty good eye for framing things, but,
Okay.
I don't have any talent at all for drawing or painting, like none
My
whatsoever.
kid has all of it.
Yeah,
She took it all.
some people do, some people don't, I think.
Yeah.
And then writing, one of my favorite poets is the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. Um, he died, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, maybe less. And he's got a poem called Personal Helicon. Helicon was the ancient Greeks, the mountain where the muses
Oh,
were supposed to
oh,
reside.
okay.
So Helicon was the source of inspiration. So his poem, Personal Helicon, it's not long, it's maybe 40 lines or so. He's talking about being a child and growing up and three different occasions when he looked down into the bottom of a well, like of a water well,
Okay.
um, and each time seeing his reflection, in looking back up from him with the sky behind him. That happened to me once, actually, when I was a kid on the farm where I grew up. Anyways, at the end of the poem, he says, "Now I don't do that. That was a childish thing," and he says, "Now I rhyme to see myself, to set the darkness echoing," which I love so much,
Oh, I
to
like
set the
that.
darkness echoing.
Love that.
And, yeah, that's very much how I feel. Like, I mean, the first books that I wrote before we adopted kids were nonfiction. Um, the last one that I wrote was a novel, young adult novel, and it was very meaningful to, tap that side of myself, the imaginative side of myself.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm starting to branch out that way. So yeah, most of my stuff is nonfiction, but
mhm,
I'm working on a
mhm.
not really suspense. What am I? Psychological more like a
Yeah,
psycho.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's important I think it's important for everyone. You know, a few minutes ago, we were kind of joking around, somebody in depression, oh, just get a hobby. That doesn't solve that, of course. But I do think that in an ongoing way, having meaningful activities in one's life, whether that is cooking, baking, dogs, taking photographs, writing, it's important to find time for oneself. Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
Self-care, that
yeah,
buzzword. It
yeah,
is important.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like you said, it doesn't solve it, but it's those coping strategies that we talk about because
Mhm.
I don't think there is no one solve.
No.
There are many things that accumulate to making you feel better.
Mhm, mhm.
And some of those things could be finding a hobby, could
Yeah,
be walking your dogs, should be walking your dogs because
yeah,
I mean they're just um and then yeah,
yeah.
therapy and medication, all that other fun stuff. So what's been your favorite one? Like what's your go-to?
Well, apart from the medication, I don't think anything would have worked without medication.
Yeah.
But I would say the writing that I do,
Okay.
the writing that I've returned to. I can't imagine, I don't know how many years, hopefully a few decades left, in my life, but I can't imagine living the rest of my life without writing.
Yeah.
That seems to be where I've ended up or want to end up. Um, and I guess another thing too is, and I should do this more, taking time to sort of look back and kind of reflect on one's life and think about
Yes.
memories, because when we were raising our kids, it was just such a hurly-burly, that it was hard to almost track the passage of time, or
Yes.
at least to experience it in the way it was happening. So after 17 years, it's like, oh, holy mackerel, what
What
happened?
happened? Yeah, where did the time go?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I very much was surprised, like genuinely surprised, to realize my chronological age versus the age that I felt, which was younger.
Mm.
Um,
Yep.
it felt like a chunk of my life, or a chunk of a certain strata of my life hadn't happened. It kind of felt like that. But of course it had, because it had been devoted to other things.
Right. Yep.
But I think I still haven't fully reconciled that. And I think the way to do that will be for me to just sit, we don't have rocking chairs because, rocking chairs are not good for dogs' tails,
Oh,
so,
yes.
um, but almost like have a metaphorical rocking chair and just sit and kind of reflect and think about, the order of things and how this led to this. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is forgiving oneself, because my wife and I, it was very challenging, and I was not the the perfect father by any means. You get stressed out, you make mistakes, you do things you
Yep.
regret. So talking to yourself and saying, well, I did my best. It wasn't perfect, but I did my
Yeah.
best, and so I can't beat myself up for not being able to do better than I did. You know?
Yes, we can only do our best. Like
Yeah,
that's all we got.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So being proud of what one has done, what one has accomplished, as I say,
Mhm.
forgiving oneself, reflecting, self-reflection, reading. I love to read.
Yes.
Um, Sometimes I find though that I there are times when I can't read, or it's like I can't focus when I'm reading. That happens
Mm. Mhm.
sometimes. And to me, that's kind of an indication that there's something, that I'm anxious about something. Everybody's
Yeah.
had a situation where you're reading something and you read the same sentence over and over and over.
Right, because it's not soaking in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's an awful feeling. Um, but to me, it's an indication. It's like a canary in the coal mine, that, okay, there's something that is bothering me, and sometimes it'll be pretty
Mhm.
obvious, and sometimes I'll have to say, "Okay, what is it exactly that's
Yeah.
troubling me?"
Yeah, when my brother had died a couple of years ago, because
Mhm.
I try to read a book a week and I do book reviews and all that fun stuff. And when he
Yep,
first died, I couldn't read. I was just like, I
yeah,
can't.
yep,
I'm so upset. I just
yep,
can't.
yep,
And then when it was actually called Shut Up and Listen. So it was a
mhm,
book on grief.
yep,
So I read that. I'm like, it made me feel so much better because it was a different take on grief
yeah,
than what I had previously read and heard about.
mhm,
Um, and after that, and I was like, okay, I can kind of get back to doing the things that I like doing, which included reading other books.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, a similar thing with me. When my father died about 20, oh gee, it's gonna be approaching 30 years ago.
Wow.
And it wasn't a shock. He had had heart problems, but, all of a sudden he had
Yeah.
an aneurysm and was dead.
Oh, yeah.
And for the next couple of years, I stopped dreaming, at night. I stopped having dreams.
Oh,
And I'd always had a very active dream life and thought about my dreams and things like that. But I just stopped dreaming. I just didn't have dreams.
weird.
And then I started to have dreams again. And often my father would be in them as a presence, as a figure,
Yeah.
but he wouldn't say anything, and it
Mm.
was his silence was very conspicuous in the dreams, and that went on for another couple of years or so. Uh, and
Hmm.
then my dreaming went back to what it used to be. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, was that my unconscious helping me process things, or
I
was it,
would think so. That's my guess. I have no
yeah,
idea. I am not a
I don't
doctor.
know.
I am not a dream expert, but
Yeah.
I would think so. It kind of sounds like it.
Yeah, yeah. Protecting me from something that was just too much at that point, or
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Dreams are so crazy that way.
Mhm,
Actually, when before I found out I was pregnant, I had a dream that I was pregnant.
mhm.
I was like, "Oh, really? All right. Let's not have more of these dreams."
Yeah. Right, right, right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
I was just gonna say, yeah, I've had
yeah.
dreams where I mean, I am very open to what almost anyone believes. What do I know? But I
Yeah.
myself am not a spooky person, Are
Okay.
there ghosts? Maybe, I don't know. I don't
Why
think
not?
I've ever seen a ghost myself, but if other people have, that's fine. But I have sometimes had dreams where they have felt very, um, clairvoyant, I guess.
Okay.
Can't think of the details now, but yeah, some people say, "Well, dreams, they're just a product of indigestion." But I think they're more than that, obviously.
Yeah. I think they try to tell us something. They help
Yeah,
us process our day,
yeah,
I
yep,
think. That's my opinion anyways,
yep.
because my opinion's the only one that matters. No. Um, so I always like to ask a similar but different question to everybody. So
Mhm,
if somebody is experiencing, and because I'm gonna say it again, and
mhm.
it's gonna be wrong again. Prosopagnosia.
Prosopagnosia, yep.
Yes. Okay, so they've never heard that term before. They're like, "Huh, but my whole life that's been just how it is. I just thought it was." What would be your advice to them?
Well,
Your wisdom. We don't like
fir
advice, your wisdom.
first thing is I would spell it for them. They can look it up.
Yes.
It's, let's see, Prosopagnosia, prosopagnosia. But, of course, you type anything close to that into Google, and
Right,
it
and you're
will it
good.
will find it, of course.
Yep.
So I would say, read a little bit about it. As I say, it's entirely harmless. It doesn't indicate that there's anything else wrong with one's brain. Um, I had a neurologist once. I This is a bit of a tangent, but, when I
Okay, I love
was
tangents.
when I was about 30, I woke up one morning and the left side of my face was not moving. My eye wasn't blinking,
Oh.
and I
Uh-oh.
thought, "What the heck is this?" So I went to the
Mhm.
hospital, and the doctor said, "Okay, you've either had a stroke or
Mhm.
you have Bell's palsy." Bell's palsy is entirely
Okay.
harmless. It's just a, inflammation of the fifth cranial nerve, if I recall correctly, and goes away almost always, after 6 weeks or 10 weeks, which
Okay.
is what happened to me. But in order to diagnose it, you have to rule out a stroke.
Mm,
So they
mhm.
gave me, I forget if it was a CAT scan or an MRI, and, a couple of weeks later, I go to my doctor who received the results, and, he said, "Oh, yeah, it's Bell's palsy is what you have," which was obvious by then anyway.
Yeah.
And he was about to send me on my way, and then he looked further down the chart or whatever. He said, "Oh, hold on." And I was like, "Oh my god."
What? What?
'Cause he's reading a report from the neurologist.
Yep.
And, the doctor said, "Well, the MRI showed that I had frontal lobe atrophication and subdural hematoma."
Oh.
And so my GP is saying, "Well," I'm saying to him, well, I said to my GP, "What can cause that?" And he said, "Well, subdural hematoma is like a bruising of the brain. Have you been in any accidents? Are you a boxer?" "No, no, nothing like that." And he said, "The frontal lobe atrophication," and I was only 30 at this point.
Oh,
He
okay, just
said,
young.
yeah, he said, "It's either extremely early, um, onset of dementia or, Jakob Creutzfeldt disease, mad cow disease."
Oh, okay.
And he said, "And, if it is, there's nothing we can do about it," you know?
Yay!
So they sent me for some more MRIs or whatever, and again, it took 2 weeks to get the results, and I was
Yeah.
just a wreck during that time. Um, and I went back to, I think it was another neurologist at that point. And he looked at the scans and he said, "Oh, I'm very blasé about you as a patient." In other words, I
Thanks.
was really boring, which was a good thing to hear. He said,
Oh,
"What
okay.
what this reveals is," he said that your brain is a variant of normal, and you have,
Okay.
what was the other thing he said? He said the convolutions of your brain are variant of normal. That's what he said. In other
Okay.
words, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just that my brain is hardwired a little bit differently.
Okay,
Um,
that's all right then.
yeah, and that who knows? Maybe that's what is related to the prosopagnosia.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I've got a facility for language. I don't know. Um, so how did I get onto that? I've forgotten now.
We're talking about wisdom for somebody who
Wisdom.
experienced it.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
wisdom.
Well, I would say don't be afraid of it. I would say, I would say that's true of any issue or challenge that a person might be encountering. Don't be afraid of it. Don't run from it or hide from it. Um, Try to figure out what it is. Try to figure out what can be done about it. And if it's difficult to do something about it, try to figure out how to get the supports that you'll need to support you as you deal with it. And I think that was really important for me and my family too. Like,
Hmm.
my wife grew up Mennonite, and so when we got married,
Okay.
we started going to a Mennonite church. So I consider myself Mennonite, and our Mennonite church community has always been a great support um,
Good.
to us. Including for when we were raising our children. So I would say having a community of family, friends, doesn't have to be a church community or temple community or masjid
Hmm.
community, but some sort of community. Um, and I guess knowing that there's there's no stigma. Well, I mean, there shouldn't be any stigma about mental illness or any kind of illness.
Yeah.
Um, and in my own experience, I've always been very open, as I am here, about mental
Yes, which
health
we love.
challenges. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just it's like having, I don't know, one uh some people, okay, I'll show you my finger. Some people, the ring finger is longer than their index finger, and some people it's shorter. It's just how we're
Hmm,
how we're
I'm
born.
checking my my
Nothing.
fingers are funny. They like don't go together.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
right. You're a natural Vulcan. Live long and prosper.
yeah,
Yeah,
because they do not go together.
right, right. So yeah, I would say whatever a person is dealing with, don't let it drag you down. You know, we're all human. The reason we're here, I think, is to look after one another. To help each other along. You know.
I love that because just on a episode, not last week, maybe the week before, I was like, we are not meant to live alone. We are not meant to be in our
Yep.
own little bubble. We are meant to be with others.
Yep.
Not to say that you have to be an extrovert, just,
Hmm.
find
Hmm.
a person.
Yeah.
A person.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay. So, I know you've a little bit mentioned about your writing, but tell us what's new, what's happening, what should we buy from you? What should we read?
Well, as I was mentioning, my first books were nonfiction. They were about language and history and culture. But
Yeah.
my most recent one is a young adult novel. It's called The Headmasters, and it's dystopian. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world in Northern Ontario. It was very important to me that it have a Canadian setting, and it's
Okay.
about these creatures that appear and attach themselves to your back, and then they can
Oh,
control people for 18 hours a day or so. And the
lovely.
protagonist is a young person. She's about 12 when the novel begins and about 20 when it ends. So that's
Okay.
why it's a young
So
adult novel.
big spans of
Yeah,
time.
yeah. It's a long novel. It's 400 and some pages.
Okay.
Um, and it's a novel of hope, I think, because throughout the novel, the protagonist, her name is Maple. She's Canadian. Um, and
Could you make it any more Canadian, that name?
right, right. she's trying to defeat these creatures, and it's only at the end that she realizes that her the answer to the problem is, I won't say too much, but it's based in love.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
so it's not a lot of dystopian post-apocalyptic novels are like about, they're sort of war-based, military-based. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I've just got I've no interest in those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Um, it's the ideas that are possible to explore in a dystopian world that interest me. Um, some people, maybe they're familiar with Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel.
Okay.
And, she said, an interviewer asked her, "Why did you set this in a dystopian world?" And she said, "Because that way the characters are stripped down to their basics. You don't need to worry
Mm.
about describing a Starbucks or things like that.
Yeah.
What you see about a character is what they are. It brings character to the surface, and I found that too. That's why dystopia novels interest me.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
kind of cool. And what's it called again?
Oh, it's called The Headmasters.
Yeah.
Um,
And we get it where?
uh, any of the online bookstores, any local bookstore will easily order it for you. If you want to buy the Kindle version, the ebook version, you can go to Amazon or Indigo and download the ebook version in seconds. So yeah, it's out there. It's getting really, really good reviews. Um, I haven't thought about. I have written another novel since then. I'm looking for an agent for it, and I'm thinking about writing a sequel to The Headmasters, but I'm not sure yet. We'll see. We'll see.
Hmm. Is it set up to be sequely, I guess, then?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. I left. I don't know if the right word is Easter eggs, but I left a few mm,
Mm,
fingerprints in it where I can sort of start a sequel.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. I kind of like that because I like when you can read it as a standalone,
Mhm.
but then there's also a world or other things that you
Yeah.
could read that go along so that if you like the characters,
Yep.
you're like, okay, there's these other ones.
Yep.
But if you miss one or I hate my biggest pet peeve is when I read a book that's like number 2 or number 3 and I didn't know
Mhm.
it was a series and I'm
Yeah.
like, son of
Yeah.
a gun.
Yeah, that happened to me with, The Golden Compass. I think that's
Oh.
the 2nd in the series, and it wasn't until I got to the end that I realized, "Oh, that's the 2nd one. I didn't read the 1st one."
Yeah, I hate that. It's my biggest pet peeve. I liked the Golden Compass movie
Mhm.
so much. I was so sad that they didn't make a sequel.
Yeah, yeah,
It had so much
yeah,
potential.
yeah, yeah. It's a great, great series.
And where do people follow you?
Um, well, I don't post a lot on Twitter or X, as it's now become, and I'm thinking maybe I will not post anymore, at all because of the
Mm,
direction it's been going.
yeah.
But if people wanna find out more about, my Facebook page and stuff like that, they can just go to, markmorton.ca. So
Perfect.
just,
Yeah,
just
because
my
he's
name dots.
Canadian, guys.
Yep,
He's
that's right.
Canadian. That's what I always say when I tell people my thing. Remember, I'm Canadian.
Yep,
Dot
yep,
.ca.
dot .ca. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and
Thank you,
sharing
Randy.
with us. I thought
My
this,
pleasure.
I'm going to say it one more time. Prosopagnosia.
You got it. There you go.
I found it so interesting. I'm like reading it off my screen and just like trying
Yep,
it's a big word,
it
guys.
is.
It's
Yeah,
a
5
huge word.
syllables.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of letters in there. So
Well,
the
thank you. I really enjoyed this.
yes, this was fun. I learned some very interesting things.
Thanks.
As always, thank you so much for the amazing guests that we have on the show. Be sure to check out their links down in the description below. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and check out our merch store. We've got some very cool things on there. That's my favorite. Sorry, I'm busy ending the stigma. But there's some other very cool designs. 10% of the proceeds always goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at RB Media because we have some great new shows coming up and you never want to miss any of those episodes. And remember, The only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye!